One of the first questions we have to ask ourselves as we take a look at this subject is, why do anthropologists study primates in the first place? And why does one's knowledge of primates, both living and fossilized forms, become such a large part of the academic growth and development of biological researchers? Well, there's a couple reasons for this. First, when you take a look at living primates, one of the things that is assumed by modern anthropologists is that whether it's their biology or their behavior, they are very similar to other complex mammals. One complex mammal in particular that is a focus in anthropological circles is the human. They're also socially and cognitively very complex in terms of how their brain functions and the demands that they put on their brain. Additionally, they are living members of a taxonomic level that's very, very important in the biological development, the biological history of a variety of complex forms, which is chordata. And we'll take a closer look at this a little later on in the lecture. In this case, both human beings and non-human primates are part of this chordata phylum. They are similar in terms of their anatomy and their physiology. And the functioning of both the anatomy and physiology are also very similar. Let's take a closer look now, maybe even a historical look, at where the system of naming comes from and why and how it's being applied. As you may or may not know, the system of classification that is used by biological anthropologists really comes from the work of a 18th century naturalist, in this case Carolus Linnaeus. His system of naming and ordering nature was really born out of a need that he had for both describing living organisms and making comparisons between them. His system has been adopted by most scientists, and especially paleoanthropologists, as they name and organize fossil evidences assigned to the ancestry of all living primates. As early as 1750, Linnaeus had already addressed the human element. He classified humans as members of the genus Homo. Along with this, he placed them into a larger taxonomic order or level that he coined to be anthropomorpha. This term is no longer used within anthropological circles. However, it gives us an understanding of how and why Linnaeus designed his naming system as he did. By the 1770s, Linnaeus's perspectives had changed. So 20 years after he initially put human beings into the genus Homo, he decided to reorganize them into a larger taxonomic order, which he coined Primates. This system is utilized today, and it's the system that we're going to be looking at in relation to the biodiversity of primates living on the planet. As we move through this system of naming, or nomenclature, one of the key elements that I want you to keep in mind is that it is a system of decreasing inclusiveness. What I mean by that is, as we move down through taxonomic or named levels from kingdom to phylum to order to genus to species, we're including fewer and fewer living and extinct forms. We'll be spending some time on this particular image. As we move down through each of the taxonomic levels, we will be including fewer and fewer forms. Our focus here will be primates and eventually human beings. As you can see, the first and largest level that we will be addressing in the system of nomenclature or naming is kingdom. Human beings are part of the kingdom Animalia. Now, there are specific anatomical characteristics that organize living humans and really all primates into this particular kingdom. Animals are unique because of their senses. They have very complex sensory organs. They're also unique in terms of their modes of digestion, very complex in nature. And another very important quality of being an animal is our sensory system or our nervous system. Beyond the kingdom, we have a phylum, in this case, the phylum Chordata. To be a member of Chordata, you need a notochord at some point in your growth and development. We have notochords in the womb that appear as we grow and develop. It is the notochord that becomes the structural blueprint for our spinal cord. Inside of a phylum, we have taxonomic classes. Now, in the animal kingdom, there are 7 recognized classes. Human beings, and of course all primates, fall within the class Mammalia. Members of this mammalian class have the following characteristics. First, a constant body temperature. Next, the presence of hair. Other characteristics include living births, mammillary glands for nursing young, and large, complex brains. Within Mammalia, there are 4,000 kinds of species. Let's break this down a little bit further, but this time let's keep our focus now just on primates. Within the order Primates, we have 2 suborders. So class, order, and then suborder. These 2 suborders include prosimians and anthropoids. They're referred to as Prosimii and Anthropoidea. Please note that the slide you're currently looking at does not include the level of order. In your notes, I would like you to include this between class and suborder. Let's take a closer look now at one of the suborders of Primates, in this case prosimians. Prosimians are primates that exhibit traits that would be most similar to the most distant ancestors of all primates. The term prosimian literally means pre-monkey. Anthropoidea, on the other hand, means human-like. Anthropoids, or at least living anthropoids, include monkeys, apes, and living hominids. We are a living hominid. This suborder then has 2 infraorders, so we'll take a closer look at that as well. And in this case, we'll ignore the prosimians for a while and just focus on tracking out where humans fit into this system of taxonomy. In this case, the 2 infraorders that we will address are referred to as Platyrrhini and Catarrhini. So we're looking at Platyrrhines, or New World monkeys, and Catarrhines, or Old World monkeys. Human beings and the great apes fall into the Old World monkey infraorder. This distinction relates to geography, where the different infraordinal primates traditionally live. Platyrrhines, or New World monkeys, inhabit the Western Hemisphere. Catarrhines, or apes and hominids, inhabit the Eastern Hemisphere, or the Old World. There are some anatomical features that are a little bit distinguishing as well. For example, Platyrrhines have flat noses, widely spaced nostrils, and nostrils that are paired with a wide nasal septum, where Catarrhines have nostrils that are closer together and that are facing generally downward. Now let's continue to focus on tracing the human element in understanding this order and ultimately this taxonomic kingdom. Within the infraorder Catarrhini, or within the Old World monkey group, there are 2 superfamilies. When you take a look at the slide, you'll note, however, that I have the number 6 following the term superfamily. The reason for this is that among all primates, throughout the entire order Primates, there are 6 superfamilies. However, the superfamilies that we will be focusing a little more closely on in the Catarrhine group include the Cercopithocoids, or Cercopithocoidea, and Hominoidea. Now, when we take a look at Cercopithocoidea and Hominoidea, we'll want to focus, again, tracing the human element, on Hominoidea. Again, this can seem a bit confusing. However, make sure to reference your course readings. Okay, within Hominoidea, we recognize three families. Now, again, when you take a look at this slide, you'll see in parentheses the number 15. What I'm referring to there is that across the entire order Primates, there are 15 families. But within that line that we're following, the line that eventually leads to you and I, we recognize, in this case, two superfamilies, and then within one particular superfamily, Hominoidea, we recognize three families: Hylobatidae, Pongidae, and Hominidae. Hylobates, these would include gibbons and siamangs. They are found generally in southeastern Asia and Malaysia. Pongids are found in a much larger geographical area. These would include the great apes such as the orangutan, the chimpanzee, and the gorilla. They're your knuckle walkers. And then hominids, that third family within Hominoidea, would include living humans and then our more recent ancestors. These would be fossilized ancestors. Finally, as we navigate through this system of decreasing inclusiveness, we get to genus. Now again, take a look at the slide. Inside of the order Primates, there are 62 or more recognized genera. Human beings are, as we mentioned earlier, part of genus Homo. And then finally, we have the term or the level of taxonomy known as species. Now, inside of the order Primates, we recognize approximately 300 to 350 plus species. There's a more complex reason for why this number expands and contracts a little bit, but that isn't within the context of this particular course. Now, human beings then have the species distinction as sapiens. So Homo sapiens is how we conclude our look, and again, tracking human beings through this Linnaean system of decreasing inclusiveness, ultimately a system of naming or taxonomy. Okay, now let's make sense of all of this. And I think the best way to make sense of it is to look at some images of living examples of living primates from each of these major taxonomic groups. As you know, the living primates today fall into kind of two major categories or suborders. This would be Prosimiae and Anthropoidea. What we're looking at here with this example of a ring-tailed lemur is a true prosimian. So let's talk a little bit about what makes this lemur a true prosimian. Lemurs, in this case, have retained a number of different physical traits and even behavioral traits that evolutionary biologists believe to be closely related to more ancient primates. They're small in size. Some are nocturnal or night dwellers, or they behave or they feed, for example, at night. They have a very acute sense of smell. In fact, ring-tailed lemurs will actually practice scent marking, which is seen as a very primitive kind of behavior. And they are habitually arboreal. And what that means, and unfortunately this image kind of conflicts with that a little bit, is that they are constantly tree-dwelling or arboreal. Other prosimians, living prosimians, not pictured here, include lorises. They're found in Africa and Asia. These ring-tailed lemurs were photographed in Madagascar. And tarsiers. Tarsiers are found in southeastern Asia. You can see examples of all of these different forms in your course reader. Now let's turn to the anthropoids. Anthropoids are divided into two infraorders. So there's two camps in the anthropoid group: platyrrhines and catarrhines. We talked about this earlier. This woolly spider monkey that you see depicted here falls into the platyrrhine group, or it is a member of the infraorder Platyrrhini. Now, spider monkeys, again, because they are New World monkeys, are found generally in the New World, in this case Central and South America. Spider monkeys look very different from human beings or any of the other primates situated within that anthropoid population. Again, the other camp being the catarrhines. One of the unique features of these spider monkeys is that they have prehensile or grasping hands, feet, and a prehensile tail. Other living platyrrhines include howler monkeys with their very unique upper respiratory system and hyoid bone. They're found in Central and South America. And in many of our labs here in the United States, we have other kinds of New World monkeys, including tamarins, who are indigenous to South America, and marmosets, who are also indigenous to South America. Very often, the reason why tamarins and marmosets are included in laboratory research is because they have multiple births. They are one of the few primates, other than humans, which give us examples of twinning. The other anthropoid population, in this case the other infraorder of living primates that I mentioned earlier, are the catarrhines, or members of Catarrhini. Catarrhines, again, old world monkeys, those traditionally of the Eastern Hemisphere, include cercopithecoids. These are monkeys of Europe, Asia, and Africa, such as Japanese macaques and baboons. And here's a wonderful example of how diverse this group is. These mandrill baboons, this is a male here, are very unique for the coloration of their face and their rather extensive snout. Other catarrhines include hominoids. I mentioned this earlier as well. These are tailless primates. These would include gibbons and chimpanzee and gorillas. Here's a very good example of the rich diversity that exists among these old world monkeys. This is a Pan peniscus, or a bonobo chimpanzee, photographed at the Milwaukee County Zoo. Members of genus Pan are quadrupedal locomotors. That means they move on all fours. We saw this with our baboons as well. However, they are also unique because they have a specialized form of locomotor type, in this case, knuckle walking. You too, as a member of the hominoids, of the catarrhines, have a unique locomotor specialty known as bipedalism, or walking on two legs. Now let's take a look at a couple other examples from these various classifying levels, or taxonomic levels. But let's talk about them in terms of their unique behavior and ultimately what we would say would be an indirect expression of their unique cognitive abilities. As we did earlier, let's begin our discussion of, in this case, sociobiology, or the unique behaviors and the cognitive abilities of these various living members of the Primates order, with our prosimians, or members of Prosimiae, that special suborder that seems to retain a lot of the more ancient traits. We'll begin our discussion of the sociobiology of primates by looking at the black lemur of modern Madagascar. The black lemurs are diurnal. This means that they're active in daytime, which is very unique for prosimians. As I mentioned earlier, most prosimians are nocturnal in nature. Another kind of interesting ecological or behavioral or ecological quality to black lemurs is that they are seasonal breeders. They have windows of time when breeding occurs. Gestation, or the growth and development of the young in the womb, the growth of the unborn, is approximately 4 months, which is, again, akin to their size and very different from what we see among larger, in this case, primates, including ourselves. In terms of group structure, approximately see these black lemurs living in groups of 15 individuals. These are multiple males and females, and there really seems to be no hierarchy to how the group is structured. Males and females have no connection to really a breeding partner other than the event itself. Once gestation is complete, the mother and her offspring bond, but only for a short time. And this seems to be another one of these typical kind of prosimian-like traits. The mother-infant bond is the strongest of all bonds the core of all primate social activities. And when you see it being shortened like this among prosimians, you realize that, again, their social behavior is very much abbreviated as a result of this. Now let's take a look at another New World monkey, in this case a black howler monkey. They are traditionally found in Belize in South America. In terms of the sociobiology of black howler monkeys, we recognize them to be full-time tree dwellers, or habitually arboreal in nature. They live in troops, in this case of individuals numbering in this case between 4 and 8. These troops, however, are temporary in nature. So this is a little bit more of a primitive social structure. Troops are territorial. When you think about arboreal primates, whether they are prosimian or whether they are anthropoids, generally they are recognized to be very territorial in nature. They have a very strong sense of the boundaries of their habitat. We see this especially among the anthropoids, in this case the platyrrhines. And the black howler monkeys really typify this particular trend. Couplings result, in this case, in a single infant or a single birth, and the offspring, in this case, remains with the mother for approximately a year. Now juxtapose this for a moment to what we saw with our black lemur. A very different kind of mother-offspring relationship. Again, a basic structure within their sociobiology. So when you compare an anthropoid to a prosimian, in this case a New World anthropoid to an Old World prosimian, we're really seeing that strong difference, not only in the biology, but also in the behavior. Gestation of the young is approximately 4 months, and males will move from one group to the next. Let's take a look at the sociobiology of another anthropoid, but in this case, let's look at an Old World monkey. So the black howler was a New World monkey. Now let's take a look at an Old World monkey. And I think the best representative of the Old World group are the baboons. So let's take a look at the Hamadryas baboon populations of what is today Ethiopia. Baboons often live in large populations. A baboon troop can number anywhere between 50 and 100 individuals for this particular species of baboon, but we've even seen them upwards of 120 to maybe even 150 individuals. They forage and travel together, which is very complex. The questions that many primates ask, or primatologists rather ask, is how is this large group structure maintained over the life of an individual? Well, troops are composed in this case of smaller units that are just as structured. They're referred to by primatologists as bands. This is usually a single male with up to 4 females whom he has bred with and their offspring. Unlike what we will see among great apes, troops in this case and these smaller bands are really not socially structured specifically around the males. Bands will actually be connected through the relationships of females and their offspring. However, dominance does play a role in both the social hierarchy of males and females, especially the males. Another factor that's at work in the sociobiology of baboons is the fertility cycle, or the estrus cycle, of females. This occurs on an annual basis and is important to group structure. Among these large Old World monkey populations, access to breeding is very, very important. Males, in this case, often will have breeding rights to females that live in their band. Periodically, however, we will see females being drawn away from other bands. This group fluctuation is generally referred to as group fission and fusion. Males also have specific responsibilities to their band. They will provide food for them, and they will also be their primary source for defense. Defense is also important. among these terrestrial or semi-terrestrial old world monkeys, the actions of predators, they are always a threat to the life history of the group. So within these populations, competition or competition models become important resources for primatologists to study their unique sociobiology. When we take a look at baboons, competition really falls into two major camps. First of all, with regards to these estrus cycles, competition occurs with regards to the access to females. So competition is sexual in nature. But then, and having to do with not only estrus, but the larger group in general and the offspring that males and females are tied to, resources are also a component of competition. Competition among males, but also competition among females. All right, let's take a look at the last of our examples for this particular lecture, and this section of the lecture having to do with sociobiology, or the relationship that complex behavior and really a complex cognitive structure has on maintaining groups and helping groups ultimately to survive in a changing climate model. Among our non-human hominoids, the common chimpanzee, Pan troglodytes troglodytes, gives us a really good example. And we'll take a look at one particular regional expression of this. It's the common chimpanzee that we find in what is today Central Africa. In this case, common chimps live in what is referred to as communities. The term troop or group often are used in tandem with this, but the term community becomes very, very important because these collectives, these groupings of, in this case, great apes, are structured in a very, very complex way. And we see this reflected in things like complex call systems or structures, and very complex diets. The chimpanzee community generally will range in size between 40 and 60 individuals. This community then is composed of 7 to 10 groups of up to 6 individuals. These small social units travel together, they gather food resources together, and they become the kind of primary or building block social organizational breeding units for the community. Another very important role that communities play within chimpanzee survival models is defensive in nature. Order within these situations where a defensive stance must be taken is usually maintained through a complex series of calls and changes in call types. One of the common expressions of complex calls among common chimpanzee when a defensive stance is taken by males or females or the entire group, is referred to as pant hooting. Social structure is also very important in these colonies or communities that we see among chimpanzee living in Central Africa. In this case, we see a very strong dominance hierarchy, and the role that males play in this dominance hierarchy is also very important. The idea of an alpha male appears in these complex social hierarchical patterns. Mating, as with other old world monkeys, such as baboons, is also tied to periods of female estrus. And as I mentioned earlier, estrus, or an estrus cycle, is that period of time during which a female is considered to be fertile. There are often physical signs that this is occurring. Patterns of mating among these great apes become very, very important as primatologists attempt to understand how groups are structured and how this group structure helps in survival. When we look at its basic unit, again, the mother-offspring relationship is important. Outside of a human model, the chimpanzee model gives us our strongest example of the mother-offspring pair bond or tie. In this case, a relationship that can be lifelong, but one that really is strongest throughout the first 7 years of an individual's life. Beyond mating and the mother-offspring relationship, there are 4 other areas within chimpanzee communities and chimpanzee life cycles that we see important partnerships developing. As I mentioned earlier, defense is at the top. Violence, in this case, demonstrates or highlights strong social bonds, bonds between males and other males, and between males and their mates. Another important example for social relationships is when we see a behavior like grooming. A third, gestures and vocalization patterns. And a fourth, when food is present. With all of its complexities, today the chimpanzee model is utilized by primatologists to better understand what the earliest human behaviors may have been like, specifically those behaviors that were important or integral to group survival.